Hi, thank you for joining me. Mindy Mandell here. And this video is part of a series of videos on Proclus's Elements of Theology. In today's video, I'm going to talk about propositions 66 through 69. And I'm going on with the E.R. Dodds translation. As always, there is a link in the description box which will lead you to a PDF version of the text. The propositions that I'm focusing on today are all grouped under the heading of wholes and parts. And proposition 66 reads, every existent is related to every other either as a whole or as a part, or by identity or by difference. So just to make sure that we all understand this, I'm going to give you some simple visuals to go with it. Okay, so every existent is related to every other either as a whole or as a part, such as the relationship of a pizza with the slices, or by identity or by difference. So like, for example, obviously a butterfly and a bee are different from each other, and yet they have some identity or sameness in the sense that they're both insects and they both fly. Okay, now let's go back to the text. So I color-coded it with the hope that maybe this will make it a little easier to see when he's jumping back and forth between the two possibilities. So either they're related as a whole or as a part, which I put in yellow, or by identity or sameness, and by difference, which I put in green. Okay, so either some are comprehensive and the rest are comprehended, and we're going to see that's talking about being whole and part. Or else neither of the two existents comprehends or is comprehended by the other. So they have a different relationship, and we're going to see that that would be identity and difference. Now in the latter case, in the case of not being comprehended or comprehending, then either they have a common affection, which would be that sameness, as participating a common principle, or they are mutually diverse. That's the difference. But and from here, he's going back to the idea of whole and part. But comprehensive terms must be wholes, and comprehended terms are parts. Now, from here, he goes on to discuss the many participating one. If the many participate one, they are identical in respect of that unity. And if, on the other hand, they are a mere plurality, so they're not comprehended as a whole, in that respect in which they are many, they differ from one another. So I pulled out that last line because I want to clarify here that he's kind of putting it all together, really. He's saying if the many participate one, they are identical in respect of that unity. In other words, they are parts of that whole. But then he goes on to say that if, on the other hand, they are a mere plurality, so you have a bunch of things that are not related as a whole. They're not parts of a whole. In that respect, in which they are many, they differ one from another. So we see the difference between being a whole with parts or being a plurality of manyness. And so we see that there are two ways in which existent things can be related to each other, either as a whole or as a part, or by identity or by difference. Okay, looking at proposition 67, we're going to see that Proclus is introducing some vocabulary here that he's going to also use in proposition 68 and 69. So 67 reads, every whole is either a whole before the parts, a whole of parts, or a whole in the part. Now this gets confusing, at least when you're first introduced to this language. So I'm going to pull out this triad that I used in my last video for proposition 65, where we saw that all that subsists in any fashion has its being either in its cause, which would be at the top of that triangle, we call it the hyparxis, or as an originative potency, or as a substantial predicate, so in its existence, or by participation after the manner of an image. So we have those three parts, and we're going to keep that, and we're going to add today's vocabulary then to this triad. So if you keep that triad in mind as we read through this, I think that would be helpful. Okay, so for either we contemplate the form of each thing in its cause, and to this form pre-existing in the cause we give the name of whole before the parts, or else we contemplate it in the parts which participate the cause, and this after one of two manners. Either we see it in all the parts taken together, and it is then a whole of parts, the withdrawal from which of any single part diminishes the whole, or else we see it in each part severally, in the sense that even the part has become a whole by participation of the whole, which causes the part to be the whole in such fashion as is proper to a part. Okay, now here's a key sentence then. The whole of parts is the whole as existence. The whole before the parts is the whole in its cause. The whole in the part is the whole by participation. So let's go back now to this triad, and we're going to pull out just that last sentence that we saw, because here we have the summary of all three. So the first part here reads that the whole of parts is the whole as existence, so substantially. And so we're going to put that one in that bottom corner with substantially. The whole before the parts is the whole in its cause. And so this goes then at the top of the triad, the whole before the parts. And the whole in the part is the whole by participation. So this goes then in that bottom left-hand corner. And so just to wrap this one up, the last part reads, for this last, the whole in the part, is still the whole, though in its extreme declension, insofar as it imitates the whole of parts, which is not true of any and every part, but only of such as can assimilate themselves to a whole, whose parts are wholes. So you notice here that there's an unfolding from the most unified to the most differentiated. And there's also, by the way, a declension of power. We saw that, remember, in the last video, Proposition 61, that unity and power are commensurate. And so you want to keep these past propositions in mind and put them all together. I know it's a lot to hold on to, but we need to do that. All right, if you keep in mind that triangle diagram that we've been building, I think propositions 68 and 69 are not too difficult. We're basically just talking about the placement of the three and the relationship of the three to one another. So 68 reads, every whole in the part is a part of a whole of parts. So just to be clear here, we are looking at a whole in the part and saying that it must be a part of a whole of parts. Okay, so here's the explanation. For if it is a part, then it is a part of some whole. And this must be either the whole which it contains, in virtue of which it is called a whole in the part, or else some other whole. But on the former supposition, meaning the whole that it is a part of is itself, on that supposition, it will be a part of itself, and the part will be equal to the whole, and the two would be identical. And if it is a part of some other whole, either it is the only part, and if so, it will again be indistinguishable from the whole, being the one part of a pure unity, or else, since the parts of any whole are at least two, this whole will include at least one further element, and being composed of a plurality of parts, it will be a whole of the parts which comprise it. Accordingly, the whole in the part is a part of a whole of parts. We see this with the pizza. If it had only one part, it would mean the pizza was not cut, and so it's a whole. There have to be at least two pieces together to comprise the whole. And the word part always implies that there is a whole. Those two words go together. For example, if there were other foods, then we can say that the pizza is a part of a meal, which would be the whole. By itself, it's just a pizza. It's not part of anything. To round off this set of propositions, let's go on to 69. This one reads, every whole of parts participates the whole before the parts. So he's saying that the whole of parts participates the whole before the parts. So if we were to number the three parts of our triangle here, 1, 2, 3, we saw in Proposition 68 that 3 participates 2, and now we're going to look at why 2 participates 1. In explaining this, Proclus writes, for if it is composed of parts, it has wholeness as an effect, since the parts, in becoming one, acquire the character of wholeness through their unification. And it is a whole immanent in a sum of parts which are not wholes. Now from here, notice that Dodds is about to bring in Proposition 23. So before we go on, I do want to quickly review that one. 23 is an important one, but it's one that can be difficult to wrap our heads around, so it's worth reviewing. So this one reads, all that is unparticipated produces out of itself the participated, and all participated substances are linked by an upward tension to existences not participated. And then in explaining this, Proclus tells us that either it would have to remain fixed in sterility and isolation, or it would have to give something of itself, whereof the receiver becomes a participant, while the given attains substantial existence as a participated term. So if you saw the video in which I first introduced Proposition 23, you might remember a diagram something like this, where the unparticipated at the top, it gives something of itself, and that becomes the participated monad, and the participant participates in the participated monad. It might be helpful to think of unparticipated as transcendent and participated as immanent. So for example, in the unfolding of reality, we say that soul unfolds from intellect. However, because intellect is transcendent over soul, at least to some degree, to that degree it is unparticipated. We as individual souls want to participate in nous as much as we can, and much of our practice is about wanting greater participation in nous or intellect. So we want to participate more. So to the degree that we participate in nous, it is a participated monad, whereas to the degree that it is transcendent and we're not immanent within it, it's not within us, to that degree it is unparticipated. All right, coming back to our text, we'll pick it up where Proclus introduces Proposition 23. He makes a reference to it by saying, prior to every participated term, there exists the unparticipated. And we just saw that in the diagram we just looked at. Therefore, the unparticipated whole exists prior to the participated. Prior to the whole of parts, there is thus a form of wholeness, which does not possess wholeness as an effect, but is wholeness itself, from which is derived the wholeness of parts. This will become clear as we go on. For again, wholeness of parts exists in many places, and in many diverse wholes composed of diverse parts. And the monad of all of these wholenesses must exist in independence of them. So in other words, we can talk about a whole computer, a whole air conditioner, a whole body, But these examples of whole must participate in whole itself, which is beyond any of these particular wholenesses. And so he goes on to say, for each of these wholes is impure, since it needs the parts of which it is composed, and these latter are not wholes. And since each resides in a particular group of parts, it cannot be the cause of the wholeness of all other wholes. Accordingly, that which makes all wholes to be wholes is prior to the parts. For if this too be composed of parts, there will be a particular whole and not wholeness unqualified. Thus, it in turn will be derived from another, and either there will be an infinite regress, or there will exist a term which is primitively whole, being not a whole of parts, but wholeness in its essence. Okay, so there has to be a wholeness beyond all of these particular wholes. And that is why the whole of parts participates the whole before the parts. We are about a third of the way through the book now. Let me know how it's going for you. Let me know in the comments section if you're having difficulties, or are you able to get some degree of vision of what's going on here? Are you able to put these different propositions together? And is it starting to form some image for you, or is it all just a big blob and mess? I know the first time through it can be really hard. If you do have any questions or comments, you can leave those below. And as always, if you found this helpful, please hit the like button. And also please think about subscribing if you don't already. I do put out new videos every week or so.